It was a quiet evening in the city, though quiet in the city never really meant safe. Streetlights flickered over cracked sidewalks and the hum of distant traffic filled the air. Most people were hurrying home, eager to escape the chill that had settled in. The city had its rhythms and everyone seemed to know their place within it, except when danger found them unexpectedly. For one man, tonight was about to turn from ordinary to unforgettable in the span of minutes. He had always been a person of routine. After years of serving in the military, where life demanded absolute discipline and careful calculation, he had learned the value of order in everyday moments. The world outside could be chaotic, but he had learned to move through it with calm, aware of every detail around him. He walked at a steady pace, his coat pulled tight against the cold, his eyes scanning the streets but never showing fear. To any passerby, he seemed like a normal man, blending in with the late-night city crowd. But his past was a part of him that no one could see at first glance. He had been part of an elite military unit, a soldier trained for situations most people could barely imagine. Every mission had demanded focus, courage, and quick thinking. Those lessons had never left him. He carried them in his posture, in the way he held himself, in the way his mind always ran through possible outcomes. Tonight, those skills would matter in ways he had never expected. The first sign of trouble came as a pair of police patrol cars turned the corner sharply, their lights cutting through the dim glow of the street lamps. They slowed near him, engines rumbling. He noticed them, as he always noticed such things, but he did not panic. From the way the cars had slowed and the way the officers' heads turned toward him, he could tell he was being singled out for reasons he could not yet understand. The officers stepped out, their movements stiff, eyes fixed on him. He raised his hands slowly in a gesture of calm and respect, signaling that he was unarmed and cooperative. It was a simple move, but it carried the weight of someone who understood authority and also understood the dangers of misunderstanding. Even if they try to provoke you, stay calm, he reminded himself silently. One officer spoke first, his voice sharp, carrying suspicion rather than curiosity. "Step aside," he ordered, tone clipped, not a question but a command. The man complied, moving a few feet to the side, giving space as instructed. He kept his hands visible, fingers slightly spread, showing no sudden movements. He did not want to escalate, not yet. The officer's eyes lingered on him, and the other officer reached into his jacket as if preparing for something, though it was unclear whether it was routine or a threat. The street seemed to hold its breath, the distant noises of the city fading under the tension building between the two men and the uniformed officers. Bystanders walked quickly past, sensing the unease but not wanting to get involved. In moments like this, the ordinary world moved away, leaving only the people directly involved in the unfolding danger. "You live around here?" the officer asked, suspicious, scanning his face for answers. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he kept his voice calm, controlled. "I do," he said finally, his tone steady. There was nothing defensive, nothing threatening. Just truth. That should have been enough, but for some reason, the tension only grew. The officers' questions became more probing, each one sharper than the last, their body language growing aggressive. The man could feel their eyes on him, measuring him, judging him without understanding who he really was. It was a feeling he knew well, though it was no less unpleasant for it. He remembered similar moments during missions when the wrong move could cost lives. This was not a battlefield in the conventional sense, but the rules of survival were not different in essence. Awareness, patience, and calm action were everything. A car passed slowly, the headlights briefly illuminating the officers' faces, showing the intensity in their eyes. The man knew that any sudden action from them could escalate into violence. He shifted slightly, maintaining balance, keeping his posture relaxed but ready. His mind ran through scenarios almost automatically. What if they drew their weapons? What if they tried to push him to the ground? Every muscle remembered training, every instinct alert. Yet even as he prepared internally, he did not give outward signs of readiness. His hand stayed raised, a gesture of compliance. He spoke softly. "I'm not a threat. I just want to go home." His voice was firm but calm, carrying a presence that subtly demanded recognition. Still, the officers were not convinced. They seemed caught in their assumptions, unable to see beyond what they expected him to be. Then came the first misstep. One officer, tense and impatient, reached toward his side, assuming he was unarmed but possibly dangerous. The man did not move violently. Instead, he took a step back, creating distance while keeping his hands visible. In that small action, he communicated both caution and control. He was aware of the tension, aware of what could happen if either side made a wrong move. Time stretched. Minutes passed like hours. The cold night air pressed down, but the tension between them made it feel heavier. Passers-by were now stopped at a distance, watching, whispering among themselves. Some raised their phones, unsure if they should record or call for help. The city's rhythm had paused, leaving a small circle around the man and the officers where normal rules seemed suspended. He could feel his heartbeat, not racing, just steady and deliberate. His training had taught him that control over fear was more powerful than brute strength. Panic led to mistakes. Clear thinking led to survival. Every muscle in his body was ready to react, yet he maintained the calm of a man who had seen far worse situations and lived to tell about them. The officers' faces showed frustration now. Their assumptions were challenged by his composure. They had expected fear, hesitation, perhaps even resistance. Instead, they faced someone whose calm presence made them uneasy. The unspoken tension was as palpable as any threat. The man knew that his past had prepared him for moments exactly like this, where patience, awareness, and control mattered more than aggression. A passerby finally whispered from the edge of the circle, "Are they really going to stop him for nothing?" The man heard it but did not respond. He had learned long ago that words were rarely helpful in such moments. Actions, clear and deliberate, carried the weight needed to survive. Every second that passed without escalation was a small victory in itself. Then a subtle change occurred. The lead officer adjusted his stance, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Perhaps he sensed the control and skill in the man's demeanor. Perhaps the officer began to realize that this encounter was not going to follow the narrative he had expected. Yet the officer's training and assumptions still held him back from fully backing down. The tension remained, thick enough to feel like a physical presence. The man took another careful step back, keeping his hands visible. His voice, low and even, carried across the silent street. "I don't want trouble. Let's just resolve this." It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact. It was also a warning, subtle but firm. Any reckless move from them could provoke consequences they were not prepared to handle. It was in this moment that the first true test of patience and judgment came. The officers, still convinced of their authority, made another small move, aggressive but not yet violent. The man's body reacted instantly, every instinct in perfect alignment. He positioned himself in a stance that could defend against an attack without threatening lethal action. The past missions, the countless drills, the discipline, all of it converged in a single moment of readiness. And then, just as suddenly as the tension had reached its peak, something shifted. The officer hesitated, reconsidering the unfolding situation. His partner looked uncertain. The street seemed to exhale, the bystanders leaning slightly forward, sensing the possibility of resolution. The man remained calm, a steady presence amid the uncertainty, aware that the next few seconds could determine everything. He was no longer just a man being targeted. He was a force shaped by experience, by discipline, by survival, but he was also human, and that humanity guided his every move. He did not seek confrontation. He did not want violence. But he was prepared to act if necessary, prepared to protect himself with the skill and precision that had been forged in situations far more dangerous than a city street. In that quiet stretch of time, the stage was set. The night held its breath, the streetlights casting long shadows over a man whose calm presence belied a lifetime of extraordinary training. The city moved around them, indifferent to the drama unfolding on its cracked sidewalks. And the man, aware of every possibility and every danger, stood ready to meet whatever came next with both restraint and preparedness. It was only the beginning of an encounter that would test every lesson he had learned in the military and in life. Every choice, every movement, every word would matter. And though the night seemed still, the tension was only growing, preparing for the moments that would follow when assumptions, courage, and skill collided in a test of survival, justice, and human endurance. The air grew heavier as the seconds stretched into minutes, and the former soldier remained still, almost statuesque, though every sense in his body was alert. He could feel the tension in the officer's stance, the rigid way they held themselves, the tight grip on their belts and jackets. He had faced enemies trained to kill, Situations where hesitation could cost lives, and yet this felt different. The danger was unpredictable, unfamiliar. But the principles were the same. Stay calm, observe carefully, and never underestimate the other side. One of the officers stepped closer, eyes narrowed, scanning him from head to toe as if looking for some hidden sign of threat. The man didn't flinch. His breathing was slow, steady, controlled. Inside, his mind was running through calculations, analyzing the officer's body language, anticipating every possible move. He knew he had to read the situation perfectly. One wrong reaction, one sudden motion, and the encounter could spiral out of control. "Hands where I can see them," the officer barked again, sharper this time. His tone carried impatience, irritation, and a hint of fear. It was a mix that made the man's instincts sharpen even more. He raised his hands slightly higher, keeping them open and visible, showing that he had no weapon, no intention of causing harm. Every inch of his posture was deliberate, measured. He wasn't just reacting, he was controlling the narrative, keeping things from exploding while staying ready for the worst. Around them, the street felt smaller, narrower. The flickering streetlights threw long, uneven shadows across the cracked pavement, and the quiet hum of distant traffic seemed muted, almost forgotten. Bystanders had stopped, sensing the tension and the potential for violence. Some were close enough to hear the officer's commands and the calm responses. Others were far enough to stay safe. Whispers rippled through the small crowd, people instinctively recording on their phones, unsure if what they were witnessing would escalate or end peacefully. The officers began circling him slightly, trying to limit his options, cutting off potential escape routes. The former soldier didn't move hastily. He had been taught to control his movements, to flow with threats rather than resist blindly. He shifted subtly, keeping a slight distance, letting his posture communicate that he could react if necessary, but that he didn't intend to provoke them. Each step, each adjustment was a dance of survival, a quiet negotiation between restraint and preparedness. "Why are you out here so late?" one officer demanded, tone carrying suspicion as if the answer might justify their aggression. The man answered calmly, "I'm heading home. Just walking." His voice was low but clear, steady and measured. There was no defensiveness in it, no hint of fear. Yet the officers didn't seem satisfied. They wanted more, expecting resistance or anxiety, expecting something that wasn't there. One of them muttered something under his breath, loud enough for the man to hear. "Something's not right here. He's too calm." That statement, though whispered, revealed exactly what the former soldier had anticipated. People trained to expect weakness are often thrown off by strength masked as ordinary calm. He didn't react to the comment, didn't engage. He knew the best defense sometimes was silence and control, letting the other side reveal their assumptions and missteps. Then the situation escalated. One officer, growing impatient, reached toward him as if to grab him or push him against the patrol car. The man moved back a step, maintaining distance, raising his hand slightly more. His movements were small, almost invisible, but deliberate. Every muscle, every reflex was engaged. He wasn't panicking. He was preparing. In his mind, he was already mapping escape routes, considering how to defend himself if it became necessary, remembering training that had saved lives in far more dangerous situations. The officer's hand hovered near his side, uncertain whether he would continue or hold back. The other officer stepped closer as well, their combined presence pressing in. The crowd of bystanders shifted nervously, sensing the tension, murmuring quietly among themselves. Some phones were raised, others were simply watching, unsure whether to intervene or call for help. The man noticed all of this as he always did, aware of the environment around him. Every detail mattered: the positioning of the officers, the distance between them, the reactions of the crowd. He felt a surge of frustration building in the officers, visible in their twitching fingers and tight jaws. They had expected fear, maybe resistance, but they were met with composure, a stillness that unnerved them. One officer tightened his grip on the car door, leaning slightly forward as if trying to assert control through physical presence alone. The man didn't respond aggressively. Instead, he adjusted his stance subtly, keeping balance and posture ready for anything, all while communicating restraint. The minutes dragged on, each second tense with possibility. The former soldier was aware of his own heartbeat, steady, measured, unshaken. He reflected briefly on the irony. Years of missions where life hung by a thread, where one mistake could end everything. And now, on a quiet city street, the challenge was patience, restraint, and awareness. This was a different battlefield, but the rules of survival remained the same. Stay calm, observe, control the situation, protect yourself. The officers began issuing commands more rapidly, voices overlapping, growing sharper, tinged with frustration. Step closer. Don't move. Show me your hands. The man complied without hesitation, keeping each movement slow, deliberate, non-threatening. He knew that any sudden motion could provoke a reaction they weren't ready for, and he was unwilling to escalate unnecessarily. Every second he remained calm was a second to diffuse potential violence. One of the officers muttered under his breath again, clearly uncomfortable with the calm confidence he faced. Why isn't he scared? That small comment revealed the deeper problem: assumptions. They expected submission, weakness, hesitation. They expected a reaction fueled by fear, not awareness. They weren't prepared for someone who had spent years mastering control, someone who could maintain clarity while under pressure. The former soldier noticed the small details that others overlooked. The officer's foot was slightly off balance. The hand hovering near the belt was tense, not fully gripping but ready. Another officer's voice had a hint of uncertainty, a crack in the authoritative mask. He cataloged these details quietly, using them to predict the next move. He didn't need to act yet. Awareness was enough to stay safe. Suddenly, a movement from the crowd caught his attention. A passerby had stepped too close, unsure of what to do. The man's eyes shifted briefly, assessing the person and ensuring no unintended consequences. It was a reminder that in these tense moments anyone nearby could influence the situation. He made a small adjustment in stance, subtly creating space while keeping attention on the officers. Every motion was controlled, deliberate, and necessary. One officer, growing increasingly impatient, made a small forward motion, almost a push, toward him. The former soldier didn't flinch violently. Instead, he shifted his weight, moving just enough to avoid contact while remaining calm, his hands still raised. That single measured reaction communicated both readiness and restraint. The officer froze for a moment, surprised by the man's ability to control the situation without aggression. The crowd held its breath. Murmurs spread through the small circle of onlookers. Phones were raised, some recording, some simply capturing the tension. Everyone felt it, the palpable sense that something critical was about to happen. The man remained calm yet alert. He was aware that at any moment the officers could make a mistake. His training told him what to do if that happened, but he hoped it would not come to that. A brief silence fell. The former soldier allowed his eyes to meet those of the lead officer. There was no threat in his gaze, but there was clarity, awareness, and confidence. It was a look that said, "I am aware of everything, and I am ready if you are not careful." That simple communication, silent but powerful, created a subtle shift in the dynamic. The officers hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. The man thought back to his training, the countless exercises where patience and observation had saved lives. He reminded himself that restraint was often more powerful than action. Violence could be avoided with calm awareness, but only if he remained steady, only if he did not give the other side an excuse. Each breath, each micro-movement was deliberate. Then came another misstep. One officer reached again toward his side, tense and impatient. The man's muscles tensed, ready to respond if necessary, but he didn't act rashly. He shifted just enough to maintain balance and readiness while still showing compliance. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension. "I don't want trouble. I just want to go home." Those words, simple as they were, carried weight. They were not an apology, not a plea. They were a clear boundary, a statement of fact. The officers exchanged glances. Their assumptions were being challenged. They expected fear, hesitation, weakness. They had found none. The man's calm confidence was unnerving, though they could not articulate why. Every subtle movement he made, every controlled breath, revealed a presence they were not prepared to handle. The former soldier remained aware of the surrounding environment, noting every possible variable, the distance to the patrol cars, the crowd's reactions, the potential for escalation. He was ready for action, yet he chose restraint. That choice, conscious and deliberate, was as powerful as any physical move he could have made. The night seemed to hold its breath with him. Each second stretched, heavy with anticipation. He was calm, controlled, and aware, prepared to handle whatever came next. The tension had not yet broken, but he had learned that patience, clarity, and careful observation could turn a dangerous situation in his favor, often without a single violent act, and so he stood there, poised between potential conflict and calm resolution, every sense engaged, every muscle ready, fully aware that the next few moments could define everything. This was the delicate balance of power, perception, and survival, and he understood it completely. The night was far from over, and the lessons of patience and awareness would soon be tested in ways no one on the street could yet imagine. The tension on the street had grown to a point where even the distant hum of traffic seemed like background noise to the drama unfolding. The former soldier stood calm and steady, hands raised just enough to show he posed no threat, yet every muscle in his body was ready to respond. His eyes scanned the officers, noting subtle shifts in their balance, the way their fingers twitched near their belts, the slight tightening of their jaws. Every detail mattered. Every detail could be the difference between control and chaos. One officer suddenly took a half step forward, leaning slightly as if trying to intimidate. The man's instinctive response was to adjust his stance, shifting weight to remain balanced, his feet planted firmly on the cracked pavement. His movements were subtle but precise, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. He had been trained to react instinctively, to protect himself and neutralize threats without unnecessary aggression. But restraint was as important as readiness. He knew that any rash action could make a situation that was tense but contained turn into something dangerous. "You better tell me what you're doing out here," the officer said sharply, voice rising with frustration. He didn't pause for a reply. "Don't move until I say so." The second officer mirrored him, circling slightly, hands hovering near his belt, ready to intervene if needed. The man's heart rate remained steady, but inside he cataloged the unfolding scenario with military precision. He calculated distances, assessed potential threats from the officers, and noted escape routes. The situation was tense, yes, but it was still under his control. Then, without warning, one officer made a more aggressive move. He reached forward suddenly, his hand aiming toward the man's side. The motion was small but intentional, meant to assert dominance or possibly make a quick grab. The man reacted instantly. Not with panic, not with force, but with controlled precision. He shifted back slightly, maintaining balance, raising his hands higher, all while keeping his body loose, ready to respond if necessary. His training kicked in automatically. The officer froze for a fraction of a second, surprised by the subtle shift. He hadn't expected compliance that came with such controlled readiness. Most people would have flinched, stiffened, or made a sudden movement that could have been interpreted as aggression. But the man's calm, deliberate adjustment revealed a mind that was clear and a body that could respond effectively if forced. That moment of hesitation in the officer's movement created a small window of opportunity, a pause that could prevent escalation. The former soldier's eyes swept the surrounding area. Bystanders were watching, some holding phones, some just observing silently. He noted their positions, aware that the officer's actions could influence them or that someone could inadvertently become part of the incident. His awareness extended beyond the immediate threat to include everything within view. Every situation he had faced in the military emphasized the importance of understanding the environment. He knew that controlling space and perception often mattered as much as any physical action. "Step closer," one officer demanded again, but his tone had lost some of its confidence. There was a hesitation now, a recognition that the man before them was not ordinary, not easily intimidated. The former soldier took another subtle step back, not in fear, but to maintain distance while keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. He wanted to communicate control without aggression. Every micro-movement sent a message. He was aware, capable, and not panicking. A murmur ran through the crowd. People were leaning forward, curious, uncertain, and a little fearful. Some were holding phones, unsure if they should record, call for help, or simply step away. The city felt as if it had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. The man didn't react to the murmurs. He didn't need to. His focus remained on the immediate threat, the officers, and on controlling the situation without letting it spiral out of control. The officers' movements became faster, more reactive. Their frustration grew, visible in their tight fists and the way their shoulders stiffened. One of them made a sudden motion, stepping closer, perhaps intending to assert control or provoke a reaction. The man's training told him exactly how to respond. He didn't attack. He didn't shout. He moved with quiet precision, stepping to the side just enough to avoid any physical contact while keeping his hands visible. His stance remained strong, balanced, and ready. Time seemed to slow in those moments. Every second stretched, weighted with the possibility of violence. The former soldier's mind worked like a high-speed processor, evaluating the officer's movements, predicting their intentions, and preparing responses that could neutralize aggression without unnecessary conflict. He thought back to countless exercises in controlled environments, simulations designed to teach him calm in chaos. This was real, far more unpredictable, but the principles were the same. Suddenly, a more forceful move came. One officer reached aggressively, perhaps intending to grab or push him. The man reacted with the skill that only years of elite training could produce. He shifted slightly, using his body weight and balance to evade the motion. It was enough to prevent contact, to maintain control, and to signal without words that he was not someone who could be intimidated. The officers were beginning to see that this was not a routine encounter. A small, sharp intake of breath from one of the bystanders drew his attention briefly. People were sensing the danger, the subtle tension that could explode at any moment. The former soldier noticed their positions, ensuring that the officer's movements wouldn't unintentionally affect them. His awareness extended to everyone in the vicinity, because in situations like this, collateral danger could come from unexpected places. Then came the turning point. One officer, frustrated and impatient, stepped forward aggressively, misjudging the man's composure and balance. The former soldier had anticipated this, and his reaction was precise. He shifted to the side, using controlled movement to maintain space, ready to respond if the officer became more aggressive. At the same time, he made his presence known, a subtle but unmistakable signal that he was trained, capable, and not to be provoked. The officers froze, recognizing something they hadn't expected. This was not just compliance or fear, it was controlled readiness. Their assumptions were unraveling. They had anticipated fear, resistance, or at least nervous hesitation. Instead, they faced calm, deliberate awareness that could react instantly if challenged. The balance of power was shifting, though they didn't yet understand how. The former soldier's voice was low and firm. "I'm not your enemy. I don't want trouble. I just want to go home." Those words were simple, but they carried authority, clarity, and restraint. They were not a threat, nor were they a plea. They were a statement of fact, communicated with a presence that made hesitation natural for those who assumed control by intimidation. One officer muttered under his breath again, clearly unnerved. "Why isn't he scared?" That question, whispered but audible, revealed the real problem. They had misjudged him. They had assumed that being a black man alone in the street at night would produce fear or weakness. Instead, they faced someone whose composure, discipline, and awareness made them uncertain. That uncertainty was visible now in the officers' stiff shoulders and quick glances at each other. A tense silence followed, broken only by the faint sounds of the city around them. The former soldier stayed still, aware of everything. He could feel the pressure, the potential for miscalculation on either side, but he did not let anxiety take hold. He knew that patience, control, and awareness could prevent escalation. One wrong move from the officers could turn the encounter violent, but he was prepared to respond appropriately, decisively, and actively. The officers began to shift, their movements slower, more cautious. They were testing boundaries, trying to assert control without triggering a reaction. The former soldier maintained his calm, letting them reveal their own uncertainty. Each micro-movement he made was deliberate, communicating readiness while remaining non-threatening. Then, the situation reached a breaking point. One officer stepped too close, a hand moving in a way that could have escalated into violence. The former soldier reacted instinctively. His body moved with perfect precision, just enough to create space, maintain balance, and prepare for any aggressive action. He did not strike. He did not yell. He simply positioned himself so that any further aggressive move from the officers could be met effectively without unnecessary harm. The crowd noticed the change immediately. Some gasped quietly, others whispered. Phones were raised to capture what could easily become an explosive moment. The street felt like it had contracted, focusing all attention on the small circle where man and officers faced each other. Every heartbeat seemed louder, every breath heavier, as though the city itself recognized the tension. The former soldier's mind raced with possibilities. cataloging every potential outcome. He considered how to de-escalate if the officers backed off, how to protect himself if they became more aggressive, and how to maintain control without provoking violence. Each thought was precise, deliberate, informed by years of training and experience that ordinary people could barely imagine. And yet, for all his skill and awareness, he remained human. His goal was not to dominate, not to show power, but to survive without unnecessary conflict. That balance, the fine line between readiness and restraint, was what defined him, what allowed him to navigate situations that could otherwise turn deadly. The officers hesitated again, clearly aware that they were facing someone beyond their expectations. The man's calm composure, his readiness, and the way he managed distance and presence had created doubt. For the first time, they questioned their assumptions, realizing that this was no ordinary encounter. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the officers began to pull back slightly. Their movements were cautious, deliberate, as if testing the waters. The former soldier didn't move forward or backward. He remained steady, hands visible, body balanced, mind alert. The situation had reached a pivotal moment. The officers had begun to recognize his skill and composure, and the immediate threat of escalation was decreasing. But the tension had not fully resolved. The night held its breath. The streetlights flickered over the scene, casting uneven shadows that danced across the pavement. Bystanders remained, phones raised, whispering, aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. And in that small circle of tension, a man trained to survive the most dangerous situations on Earth stood ready, calm, aware, and unshaken, waiting for the moment when the encounter could either resolve peacefully or reach the next stage of danger. Every second mattered. Every micro-movement, every word, every glance could shift the outcome. The former soldier knew this, understood this, and accepted it. He was not seeking confrontation, but he was prepared for it. And in that quiet, tense night, the stage was set for a moment that would test skill, patience, courage, and humanity like never before. The moment of highest tension slowly began to ease, though the air remained thick with unease. The former soldier stood in the street, still calm, hands raised slightly, body poised, every sense alert. He had controlled the immediate threat, but he knew that even small gestures, slight misjudgments, or sudden movements could undo everything. The officers were pulling back slightly, their movements now cautious, hesitant. Their assumptions were challenged, their authority quietly questioned, and the man's composure had forced them into an unexpected pause. The former soldier's mind stayed active, cataloging the officers' every movement. He watched their eyes, noticing the slight uncertainty, the subtle change in their tone, the tension in their shoulders beginning to ease. He understood that in situations like this, fear and aggression were contagious. If he remained calm, there was a chance the officers could regain perspective without making the situation worse. If he lost control even for a second, the entire encounter could spiral. "Sir," one officer said finally, voice lower, more controlled, almost as if testing a new approach. We need you to step aside so we can check identification." It was a request, not a demand. The subtle change in language indicated that the officers were beginning to recognize him as a person rather than a threat. They had started to understand, though only partially, that their assumptions had been wrong. The former soldier nodded slowly, maintaining his posture. "I understand," he said calmly. "I will cooperate. I want this resolved safely for everyone." His voice carried clarity and restraint, demonstrating both compliance and awareness. He made no sudden movements, no attempts to assert dominance, no signs of impatience. His entire presence communicated that he was capable but willing to prevent further conflict. The officers took a small step back, giving him space. One of them pulled out a notebook, another glanced around, clearly reassessing the environment. The crowd of bystanders had remained at a distance, some watching intently, some whispering quietly to one another. A few phones were still recording, capturing the tense moments that had just passed. The former soldier noticed all of this but did not allow it to distract him. Every person, every potential variable remained within his awareness, but he did not let it disrupt the calm he had cultivated. It was a moment of reflection, though fleeting. The former soldier's mind replayed the earlier moments, the officer's aggressive movements, the sudden escalation, the way he had shifted and adjusted to maintain control. He realized that what had saved him was not just his skill, but his ability to remain calm under pressure, to assess each situation quickly, and to act with precision rather than emotion. In life, he had learned, panic could be as dangerous as any external threat. The officers were now talking quietly to each other, their voices low, cautious, almost conspiratorial. They were reviewing what had just happened, trying to reconcile their initial assumptions with the reality they had faced. The former soldier remained still, listening just enough to gauge their mood. He understood that part of de-escalation was allowing the other side to regain a sense of control without challenging them further. It was a delicate balance requiring patience and timing. One officer stepped forward carefully, his movements deliberate and slow. He extended a hand in a gesture that was almost an apology. "Sir, we overreacted. We misjudged the situation. We're going to handle this properly." His voice was calmer, but there was still an edge of nervousness. The former soldier kept his hands visible, body relaxed, but his eyes remained alert. He could sense sincerity, but also knew that caution was still necessary. He nodded slightly. "Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's ensure no one gets hurt. That's what matters most." His response was firm but not confrontational. It conveyed authority without aggression. It showed that he had taken control of the situation without escalating, and that he was willing to maintain peace. The officers began to move back fully, creating space. One of them gestured toward the patrol car, inviting the former soldier to provide identification. He complied slowly, moving deliberately toward the vehicle while keeping his hands visible. His movements were measured, showing cooperation, while still maintaining the awareness that had protected him moments before. Every step was conscious, every posture intentional. The crowd began to relax slightly, sensing the change in dynamics. Some murmured in approval, others whispered in relief. A few kept recording, documenting the lesson in human behavior, restraint, and de-escalation that had just unfolded. The city seemed to exhale collectively, the tension that had gripped the street moments before slowly dissipating. As the former soldier handed over his identification, the officers studied it carefully, comparing names, running checks, verifying information. All the while the man remained calm, observing them just as they observed him. He noted subtle changes in their body language, small signs of humility mixed with continued tension. They were learning, though slowly, that authority alone was not enough to control every situation. Understanding, respect, and careful action were equally important. The moment also offered a chance for reflection on his part. He had faced extreme danger countless times in his past, yet the lessons of restraint and awareness were perhaps more valuable than any weapon or skill he had learned. On a quiet street in a city where assumptions could lead to disaster, his ability to remain calm, to anticipate moves, and to act with precision had kept him safe. And more than that, it had allowed the officers to see him as a human being rather than a threat. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the officers began to step back fully, signaling that the immediate threat had passed. One of them spoke again, voice steady now, no longer sharp or a